Well, we're at 11:33. You feel like we're ready to get started, and we'll let the last few folks come on in if there's anybody else.
Sure thing. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for participating in this virtual multi-day event. I have been a Best Prep fan for lots of years, and this technology integration workshop has been a fabulous experience year after year. So it is great on behalf of Best Prep that they have been able to continue it even in this virtual platform. So thank you for participating. My name is Dean Brewer. I'm the business specialist in the Career and Technology Education Unit at Minnesota Department of Ed. And so I'm going to be serving as a co-host, a facilitator. Other than the first minute or so here, you will not hear me very much, but I will help try and monitor questions and things in the chat. We are fortunate here today to have Dr. Makari Trainum with us from the Minnesota Department of Education, and she's got a wonderful session. I've had the good fortune of being in some sessions she has led in the past, and so I think you are going to find it very engaging, very informative. I know from some of my experiences in Zoom that, make sure that you are monitoring and knowing whether you are, whether your mic is muted, camera on or not. And I think Makari is going to go over some of those expectations with you during the session as well. But I will do my best to keep up with your questions and monitor the chat and so on. But I look forward to, I think you're going to have a great learning experience here today. So with that, I'm going to cut out and let Makari get started. Welcome, everyone.
Good afternoon, all. So glad that you're here and that you chose to join today in our live session. And for others, they'll just get the video and it just, they'll get to hear all of you talk and me talk at some point. So this will be great. So I'm really glad that you decided to join us. The title of our work today is that it doesn't have to be this way, right? So we can address inequities within the work that we're doing. And so I always like to start with a grounding, and I'm going to start us with a quote. And I want you to think about this quote. And I want you to think about what comes up for you as you hear this. We do not really see through our eyes or hear through our ears, but through our beliefs. We do not really see through our eyes nor hear through our ears, but through our beliefs. That is Lisa Delpit who said that. And I want you to think about what comes up for you when you hear that. And how do you think that's going to relate to the work that we're going to do today? So think about it. Take like a couple of seconds. Okay, I'll give you more than, take like 15 seconds. Think about what's coming up for you and how you think it's going to relate to our work today. And you are welcome to either use the chat or you are welcome to use your voice. And because there's just a few of us here today, using your voice should be just fine. So take a minute and then please add to the conversation. Any thoughts? What's coming up for you guys? There has to be something churning. Yes.
I'll talk. So we can all see and hear the same things, but our beliefs kind of shape our lens that we filter those things with, in our thinking and what we do about that and kind of how that hits us and what our next steps are.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Tell me your name.
Anne, sorry.
Anne.
A long
Okay.
time ago, I signed into a Zoom as AM, and I can't figure out how to change it. So it's just sitting in there. I'm always AM.
Okay, AM. Thank you, AM. Appreciate it.
Anne, yeah.
Other thoughts? Thank you for that. Other thoughts that's coming up for folks?
Well, it makes me think of assumptions and that our beliefs are really our assumptions. And then I think about how this idea that I believe that we see what we want to see. And so we ignore the other things. And so it kind of is a reminder to look for the other things that we maybe don't want to see or are failing to see.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Anne. Let's get one more person. One more person. Don't be shy.
This is Sean.
Hi, Sean.
And what I think is kind of piggybacking both of them, but also I think also what you're told too, and then like to back off that too, like those beliefs like kind of get onto you too. So even when other people are telling you different things, it's like, no, we've always done that way. I'm not thinking real specific examples, but you know what I mean. We've done it this way. And then you kind of just say, okay, I guess, you know, when someone new comes in, it's like, well, we've always done this way, so why we don't have to change. So if that makes any sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And we can think about that just most recently with the changing of the name for the Redskins, right? And the fact that that is now really being considered, like they're actively moving towards saying we're going to change our name, whereas for years, right, for decades, even though that argument had came forward and there was requests to change this, part of what was there was like, this is who we are. We've always had this name. We shouldn't change. So that exact same thing, right? That this is what we do. This is who we are. Why should we change it? It makes no sense. So people get connected to things, and their beliefs and their values are flowing through practices and policies and procedures. The way that we do things, it shows up. I want you guys to keep this in mind as we're talking today, and we're talking about addressing inequities, this idea of what we see, what we hear, and really recognizing that 99.9% of the time we see things not as they are, but as we are, right? So as we are is how we see and filter the world around us, okay? So here's a few norms that I just want us to be aware of. I'm just going to ask for you to keep your mics muted unless you're speaking. We're a relatively small group, you know, less than 20 people right now. And so you can put your voice into the space without, I think, interrupting each other. And so that will be fine. But if you're not speaking, I'm going to ask that you keep your mics muted. I would love to see your face, as others would too. If we were together, we'd be looking at each other and smiling. And so we want to just be able to continue that in this space as well. Recognizing that body language is a percentage of how we communicate, right? And it's always in context. It's not separate from the context that we're in, but it certainly brings things up. Please feel free to use the chat box for questions and comments. And we have Dean, who's going to be helping to monitor that and to bring things forward as they come up. I encourage you to stay engaged, which means that as I do, and I'm sure many of you do, you either have a wonderful pet in your home or you have children or other people that are around you. I happen to have a teenager and a preteen that at any given time will take attention or want attention, even when I'm working. And so it's okay. This is the lives that we're living at this moment, but work as best you can to stay engaged with the work that we're trying to do today. I'd like for you to be able to speak your truth. That means your truth is based on your experience, your perceivedness of what's happening around you, and recognizing that as you speak to your own experience, it's only part of the story, that we oftentimes are missing important stories that helps to craft and give us a bigger picture of what's happening and what's going on around us. Be open to experiencing discomfort today, meaning that we're going to be pushing on, my hope is that we're going to be pushing on things that you might not necessarily have considered, and therefore it's going to bring about this level of like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about that, and that's okay. You want to be in this place of growth. I always liken this to getting healthy, right? When you are wanting to drop a few pounds, if you start to feel a little bit of pain in your leg when you start running, and then you're like, forget it, I'm not running anymore, those pounds that you want to lose will probably not come off. But if you stick with it and you say, okay, this hurt a little bit today, so I'm going to stretch a little bit more. I'm going to make sure when I'm done, I'm going to stretch. I'm going to eat a banana for potassium. Those types of things are going to help you, right? So that the next time you go out running, you can stick with it. So you want to be able to experience discomfort because that discomfort helps to push forward with change. Ultimately, we're going to expect and accept non-closure. And what that means is that this work is always going. It's never ending. I do not have the answer. I'm not the magical facilitator who will give you all those answers, because if I was, I'd be on Oprah right now. And you'd be watching Oprah and me talking with Oprah right now in her garden somewhere. And so since that's not happening, it's recognizing that we are constantly engaged in this work. It never ends, and it means that you can always go back and ask questions. And I just really want to encourage you that if you're wondering about things things that's coming up for you, I want you to ask the questions, ask those hard questions. That's what we're here for, to engage and to really push through things that may feel difficult. So with that, I want you to keep a couple of things in mind. I want you to think about where we stand right now. And I want you to think about what is necessary in order to make a more equitable learning experience for your students and even for your families this fall. When you think about that in this moment, what are some things that come up for you? And I want you to also think about how we can ensure that we don't return to business as usual. I know that there is a desire. Our brains function in a capacity of patterns. And so we want to do things that keeps us in a space of things that we know. And when we get into the unknown is when we experience this level of disequilibrium and discomfort, and we want to stop and to get back to what makes us feel good. And so we want to really be able to disrupt that, understanding that there are plenty of inequities that were existing prior to the pandemic that really got illuminated as a result of the pandemic. And so we want to be mindful of those things because if we go back to business as usual, it means that we go back to being blind to those inequities that were existing that we were not paying attention to. So just take about 1 minute to jot down your thoughts that come up to this for you, that come up with these questions. Just take a moment. And let's take about 30 more seconds. I know it's not a lot of time, but we only have 45 minutes. Normally I'd give you more time, but we're short. So this is meant to be a quick think. Think quick. Think fast. Okay. Okay. Keep these questions in mind as we are going through the rest of our session today. And we're going to actually come back to that at the end of these questions at the end of our session. Okay. So keep these things in mind. So I want to start you with looking at this picture and looking at this quote. We are not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm. We are not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm. So often, we have heard, I would say since March, since we've had our stay-at-home order that came into place, we've been hearing that we're all in this together. And although there's truth in the sense that we are all experiencing a pandemic, it's not true that we're all experiencing this pandemic in the same way, right? And so it's important that you think about how you see and understand this picture is going to determine how you see and understand the situations and circumstances that have presented themselves both as a result of the pandemic, but have simply been illuminated as a result of the pandemic, right? So we have a situation where there were inequities that were existing prior, and then there's been inequities that have come to be as a result. And these are a both and situation. And so it's important that as we think about our students, as we think about our families, as we even think about ourselves, the way that we are experiencing this pandemic, whether you have health insurance, whether you have a job, whether you are a first responder or you're not, these are all ways by which we are experiencing this storm, this pandemic, very differently. It's the way that we are experiencing inequities very differently. It's understanding that what was happening, it doesn't negate what's happening before. Like what's happening now doesn't negate the experiences and the inequities that was happening before the pandemic. The pandemic has simply amplified, right? They've simply made worse many of the inequities that were existing, and more people have been added into this, into different boats in experiencing these different inequities. So it's understanding that for some folks, you're in straight up a yacht and you are riding this sucker through, right? You have more than what you need. You have an abundance of what you need. And for others, I barely have anything close to what I need in order to move forward. And the way that we understand that is really going to be the way that we start to address inequities within our system. I want to just have you think about and consider, these are headlines that has been in the news since March, quite frankly. And I made some clippings of these things as a way to bring forward this reminding us of where we're at and what's going on around us, reminding us of the different inequities that are existing, reminding us that people are experiencing all kinds of emotions during this time, from anxiety to depression to frustration. There's also people who are finding ways to be really creative, who are finding ways to give back in this time because they do have, and I want to be able to help. And so we have all types of things that's going on. And the way that we respond to this is all dependent about how we see and understand the world around us, where our own values and beliefs sit and situate ourselves within this. Whether we see when kids are in families, so prior to the school year ending, when students and families weren't able to connect, did we see and engage with that in an empathetic way? Or did we see and engage with that in a critical, potentially deficit mindset by which we're making assumptions for why kids and families are unable to engage or engaging, right? Where we put value for those who were able to engage and where we took away value from those who were not. And it's also keeping in mind that the desire for us to get back to normal is something that is a normal thing for us to want to do. And we have to unpack the why we want to get back to normal. For whom does this benefit, right? As we look at getting back into normal, what normal used to be like, I can go out and I can shop, I can go out and I can eat, I can go out and get my hair done. If you haven't noticed, there's a lot of gray over here, right? So there's a lot of things that we would want to be able to do that puts us back into normal that we are not able to do. And as we push to try to get there, the question that you have to constantly be asking yourself is, for whom does this benefit? And for whom is going to be on the losing end of this? And so you have to constantly be pushing yourself through these types of questions. This is kind of the other end of this, with continuing this idea of we are in a pandemic, continuing this idea of we have inequities that fall around us. It's also raising up the innovations that have come in this time as well, right? That more and more we are finding dance parties that's taking place. We're finding people finding ways to create. There's all these new apps that's coming up, like Marco Polo, where you can, send a video to someone of you talking and they send a video back, and you can do happy hour where everyone gets together. You have musicians that are doing battles around who has the greatest, playlist, or who can sing better than the other. And so we're finding different ways to engage that we would have never considered had we not been in the circumstances that we're in. And still, even with all of these different ways by which we're looking to engage and we're looking to change the narrative and we're looking to find ways to keep ourselves occupied, right? We still know, and we should still be aware of the inequities that exist for people that are unable to take advantage of just the virtual dance party, as an example, right? Of just being able to hear these musicians battle in their lyrics. These types of things can fall flat for those who are consistently experiencing inequities, where their families, parents or guardians are the first responders, and therefore are unable to be at home in the same way that we might be able to be at home with our families. The other part is thinking about how we even consider who's a first responder, right? Oftentimes when we think of first responders, we put that on our doctors and we put that on our paramedics. We will even put that on our officers and our firefighters. But we so often forget about those people who are serving us within the restaurant industry, who are serving us when we go to buy our groceries, who are serving us when we go to get gas. All of these people are also first responders that think about the inequities that are applied to them, because they are not the first ones that come to mind when we say that. And so it's important for us to know, again, how our beliefs and our values play out in this, because we can be blind to things that are right in front of us. So I just want you to use your voice for a minute and or use the chat room to identify inequities that have been highlighted that you have identified as being highlighted or increased as a result of the pandemic? What have you seen or come to recognize that you may not have recognized before? And I see in the chat that Sean said access to Wi-Fi.
Yep, and not only access to Wi-Fi, but the difference between Wi-Fi and high-speed internet. Because a Wi-Fi access will get you to a website, but high-speed internet will get you to those videos and to those different pieces. And in the metro, Wi-Fi is different than outstate metro or Wi-Fi when you're on, or if you're in a valley out in the country. So trying to get high-speed internet, not just Wi-Fi, to every kid.
Absolutely.
And teacher.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Jen. I'm seeing gaps in internet access was said again, access to stable meals, access to devices, inequities in home and shelter. All of these things are absolutely true. Thank you to all of you who are putting answers into the chat. All of things are true. We have just seen an abundance of inequities that have been amplified. And then the next thing that happens is the ability to try to give rationale as to why these things are happening, right? And so we want to be mindful and conscious of how we are going about doing that too. As just a, for some reason, there we go. As just an example of some things that I had identified is what we said, Jen had brought this up and a number of you have said it as well, this idea of access to high-speed internet, having it be stable. We've seen this even within the agency, that people who are working from home don't necessarily have high speed or a stable internet access. Devices for students in the household, I think we take for granted that everyone is going to have access to a Chromebook or some sort of device that's going to allow for them to get connected. Assumptions that students even have quiet space to work in. I was talking with my daughters about this the other day, about like, how do we create kind of this space that you need, because a bedroom is very different, right? And working in your bedroom is liable to put children to sleep, right? They're not going to go in there and just be like, I'm going to be working. The next thing you know, they're going to be sleeping in their bed, napping it out. And so, you know, the assumption that all kids have some space to actually work and to do things. The assumption that students even have access to adults to help them, right? To help and to support them. And it's not to say that they don't want to. Our parents absolutely, and guardians absolutely want to help and support their loved ones. Sometimes they just don't know how, right? We make the assumption that they can get it, that they know how to access certain sites and they know how to use sites, that's both adults and students, when the reality is they don't, right? They haven't been taught, they haven't been given. Now they can figure out TikTok, but they may not be able to figure out Google Classrooms, right? So the reason why, because they're practicing on TikTok, they're not practicing on Google Classroom, right? So it's understanding, how do we ensure that they have the access, and how do we check our assumptions about what's happening and what kids and families are able to do. So keep those things in mind. This continues, what we've learned at this point is that in existing inequalities, and hold on for just a minute, I have to kind of collapse this for a minute, sorry. Okay, that existing inequalities have been magnified, as well as new ones being illuminated. We also know that as educators, and I include myself in that, I am a former teacher, principal, all those wonderful things, that we aren't necessarily prepared. We weren't prepared for doing distance learning, right? We didn't necessarily have the experience with distance learning. On top of that, the other piece to this is recognizing that distance learning is inclusive of online learning or virtual spaces, but it's not exclusive to that. And that's part of the conversation that we have not had. Our beliefs and our assumptions, as well as how we determine, or how we've placed fault at the hands and feet of students and families because of our own beliefs and our values. Those are things that we have to be mindful of, and these are things that we've learned and seen along the way. I want to give you this quote that is on a building that is this idea of pushing back against wanting to get back to normal. And what they said was, we won't get back to normal because normal was the problem. there's so many things that's inherent with maintaining status quo, right? Maintaining that we just kind of keep doing business as usual, is that we didn't have an opportunity to pay attention that at any point in time, for many students and families, for many educators, that they could find themselves in situations where they were in need of things that they never thought that they would be in need of. And you didn't necessarily pay attention to how to utilize certain services because you never had a need to do that. But for those families and students and other folks within our society who have had to take advantage of these services, for folks who've never had to do that, they've had to learn to walk this walk along the way. And it's been difficult in many instances, but it also brings about this sense of understanding and empathy and sympathy that didn't necessarily exist when that wasn't your experience. So let's just kind of talk about this idea of we don't really see through our eyes or hear through our ears, but through our beliefs. And I want you to keep this idea of values and beliefs as a component of it. And this idea that it starts with you. So the reason why we've been spent this time and not being like, so here's the 10 things you need to do in order to address inequities in your classroom, is because it doesn't work that way, right? There isn't 10 magical things that you have to do and then it goes. The idea is that it actually starts with you as the individual working on yourself in the sense of understanding at the very beginning, what are my values and beliefs? What are the assumptions that I hold? And then how does that play out in how I work and do the work that I do within the classroom and within my community, within society? And so values and beliefs are built off of the experiences that you have or you don't have, the images that you see or you don't see, the people that you interact with or you don't interact with, the education that you receive or the miseducation that you receive. All of those things function as a way to build out what your values and beliefs are. So if I have not had experience in traveling anywhere outside of my state, let's just say anywhere outside of my community, the odds of me, how do I then build out my understanding of what the world is around me? I'm going to build that out through what I see in other places, right? What I see on television, what I might read in media, what I might read in books. And it's getting built out through the images that I might engage with or I don't engage with. The fear that's taught to me or not taught to me. All of those things are building out how your beliefs and your values work. And it ultimately pushes towards the actions that you take or you don't take, right? And so it functions together in this sense of one of these things. It doesn't have to be one, it's all of these things functioning in different ways over time to help you to be where you're at in this moment. With the way that you view education, if you see education as being the great equalizer, that is going to be based on how your experience has been through education. And even if your experience wasn't positive, you might have said, well, I had a terrible experience in school. And so I became a teacher so that I could make a change, right? Whatever that change might be. But you're using those experiences as a way to determine what your actions are going to be, right? It's built out what your beliefs are about the system by which you work in. For those of us who have had great experiences in school and we decide, I'm gonna be a teacher someday because school is awesome. It's wonderful, right? And so then that's part of our belief and value. School is great, it's awesome. And so then that builds out my action or my inaction. And the reality is, because we've all gone through the same system, we reproduce the same things, the same inequities over and over and over again. And so it takes this idea of consciousness, a critical consciousness, to disrupt this work that we're doing. Part of our values and beliefs are based on our intersecting identities, right? And so we have lots of identities by which we attribute and by which we operate by within this society. And those different identities have positions of both oppression and marginalization, as well as power and privilege, right? So when you simply think of it from an age perspective, you can think from, the younger you are, it seems like they get access to everything. People believe in them in a way that they won't believe in you when you're hitting your 60s and your 70s, right? There are different things that happen, whether good or bad, that start to frame how we see and understand the world. As a single person, you might see things a little bit different from a person who has children. And you might see something really different if you are a single parent versus a parent versus a family that is in unit, right? So all of these things build out how we see and understand the world, and it determines how we act or how we don't act within the world. I want to pause there because I've been talking and see if there's any questions or comments or thoughts that's coming up for folks. Okay. So I'm going to take you to this diagram that I put together as a way to think about how your values and beliefs are informing the work that you're doing, right? And so when we think about it from a teaching classroom perspective, the what and the what and the how we teach is often a reflection of our experiences and our beliefs and our values. Meaning that I'm a former math teacher. And when I think about my first few years of teaching, I think about the way that I initially began teaching was very much a reproduction of the way that I learned math myself, right? And although I had a master teacher and she showed me some different things, overwhelmingly the things that I was taught, even through my student teaching program or experience, was that was similar to the way that I learned it in school. And so as a teacher in the classroom, I started doing pretty much the same thing because my beliefs and values around education was built through my experiences, right? So how I chose things, how I choose, what I don't choose is all a reflection of that. It's informed by my values and beliefs, and my values and beliefs go back to what we just talked about, this idea of our experiences or lack thereof, the images that we see or that we don't see, the people that we interact with or we don't interact with, our education and or miseducation within the system, and they get reflected in the choices that we ultimately make. From there, it's going to inform how we get to being culturally responsive. And our attention, or lack thereof, for recognizing the culture that we as individuals bring into the classroom is going to absolutely determine how I am being responsive to the children that I serve. So for example, if you are a Midwestern white person, that's where you've grown up, that's how you've lived your life, that's the culture that you're going to bring into your classroom unless you're being highly intentional of what your culture is. And so you're bringing that into the classroom regardless of whether you're serving a classroom that's full of students of color or whether you're serving a classroom that's predominantly white. And in either situation, there is a disruption that needs to happen in order to be culturally responsive. Because our white students need to be just as much aware of the global society by which they reside in as do our students of color, right? There is not a difference in that. There needs to be awareness on both sides. And oftentimes the way that we treat it is, oh, wow, we have a classroom full of students of color. I need to know what their culture is and then kind of maneuver. That's if we really are trying to be responsive. And yet we don't do that for our white students because our white students have culture as well. And we also need to be mindful of how we are interrupting status quo and beliefs that are adhering to ensuring and maintaining inequities throughout society. And so it means that we have to be super mindful of the culture that we bring with us into the classroom. And as we're aware of the way by which we behave and by the way that we operate, we can then start to work and see our students as being just as important to the culture and to the creation of knowledge as we are. And so often we show up as the complete and total knowledge holders without addressing and without recognizing and without acknowledging the knowledge and the expertise that our students and families bring into our rooms every day. So being aware of ourselves is the first piece in trying to disrupt and address inequities within the schools, within your classroom first, and then as you look further and beyond in the school system itself. So here are some things that I want you to be thinking about is that as we are thinking about and understanding our bias, we have to also reject them. So part of understanding who we are, part of understanding our values and beliefs means that we have to be able to take that information and do something with it. And that with it is going to be catching and rejecting our deficit thinking and perspectives. So when we think that students aren't showing up because they just don't care, or that families just don't care, we have to start with rejecting, where is that coming from and why do I believe that? We have to be conscious of what our experiences are. What have been our experiences when it comes to school, when it comes to this pandemic? And how does that influence the way that I see and interpret the behaviors and ways of being from other folks? That's the very first thing that we have to be able to do. The next piece is going to be recognizing our unexplored assumptions, because unexplored assumptions actually feed into our implicit bias. And then we have to recognize our habit to default to behaviors and beliefs and practices that are comfortable and known to us. We are creatures of habit and we have patterns. Our minds function through making connections. And those connections are made based on our own experiences and our own things that we've interacted with. And so we have to work to be really aware of when you are defaulting to things that you're like, yeah, that's what it is. And instead move into a critical questioning around why you believe that is the way it is, so to speak. And here's some things when we're talking about, so what do I do? So Makari, you said all that. And so what does that mean? So let's start addressing inequities now. And what that means is that you have to recognize that every student and family, they have unique needs. And part of what we need to be doing is working together to help find solutions. Oftentimes, we don't consider necessarily using Facebook or using social media platforms as a way to connect with families. We love our emails and we will jot off an email quickly, but that might not be the best way to connect with parents. So how are we looking at ways that are different from the way that we normally do things and looking to work with families and students to find unique solutions? We want to maintain and we want to leverage our relationships with students. And we want to really work to receive real-time feedback. And that doesn't mean a survey. Surveys have their place, but it's not always a survey. Really, it's about just talking to your students. It might be setting up office hours and you give kids times, or you say, when can you meet with me? Because I really want to get feedback around how things are working for you. What could be done better? And you'd be surprised at students that are really just looking for an opportunity to have one-on-one time with you, or even in small groups of 5 maybe. So consider how you can leverage your relationship with students and consider how to use those relationships to actually give you feedback. You want to connect with students about non-school stuff, right? Look for ways that you can connect with them that has nothing to do with school. Tell me about what's happening, and don't just tell me that it's good. Give me a story that goes with that good, right? You want them to really give you information so that you can connect with them in a meaningful way. And then you want to always look for ways that you can connect with things that's happening in their communities and around the world, right? Every time that we don't make those connections, education becomes just this thing that we do versus education being highly meaningful because I can see the connection to what's happening in my world right now. Reframe the access issue away from it being the fault of students and families. Again, this is how we're seeing and making assumptions and determinations about students who are connecting and those who are not. And consider real-time assessments, things that you can ask kids about their learning versus, again, giving a test or a quiz. Be mindful about communication overload because we are virtual, because we're home more often. Everybody is sending stuff, whether it's via mail, social media, and so forth. And so think about what are things that you might be doing that might be overwhelming students and or their families, and what you can do to kind of pull back from that. The key is to be flexible. You want to be flexible in all of this. So I want to take this back to our reflection questions. And now this is more pointed to you. What is necessary in order to make a more equitable learning experience? What do you need to do? And then how can you ensure that you don't turn and go back to business as usual? So those are just some things that I want you to reflect on. And I want to just open this up for questions. We got about 2 minutes left in our time. And any questions or thoughts that's coming up for folks, this would be the time.
Dr. Trainum,
Yes.
would you prefer that we write them in the chat or speak out, or does it matter to you?
It's totally up to you. It's really just for you to be reflective too, that you might be able to look at where you started and where you ended today.
Okay.
Thank you, James. Other thoughts, questions, wonderings that's coming up for folks?
I do actually have one, which is one of the things that you mentioned actually made me realize that there is a possible advantage to distance learning, and I'm grateful for anything that feels that way right now.
Yes.
So one of the things that I've experienced as an educator before is the culture difference between me and my students sometimes stands in the way of relationship building when my classroom is under-resourced in terms of other adults who can provide loving support to students as they're moving into their zone of proximal development.
Yes.
So one of the things that a distance learning format gives me the opportunity to do is more sort of small group on one or one-on-one connection that allows me to build some of that relationship outside of the highly social context.
Yeah.
So that I was like, oh, that's actually an advantage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if it's any consolation, my daughter, my 12-year-old, or about to be 12, she'll be 12 next month, said today that she likes, the idea of having these small groups where she can talk in small groups with her teacher. And so that's an advantage that she wasn't getting when she was in the building every day. Other thoughts, questions, wonderings that's coming up for folks?
Hello, my name is Fatima Lawson, and one thing that came up a lot was people just understand distance learning to mean online learning.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you pointed that out, that it's inclusive of, but not exclusive of, because we have a lot of families who could not access even the hotspots that the district provided, and learning stopped. So what kinds of advice would you give us so that we share with our teachers, how to navigate around technology-dependent distance learning?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So one of the things that I had brought up to folks, and I know we're at time, so I'm going to make this really quickly. One of the things that I had brought up to a group of folks was considering similar to what you see with the boxes that, how you can order a box, like you order like a subscription and every month you get a box or whatever, but doing something similar to that where it is an activity box that can be sent to kids that has different activities, things that ask for them to maybe go outside and try some things that they might be able to do right in their home. So it's like a little surprise that they receive maybe weekly that has different types of activities for them to complete and to do, and the potential of being able to return. Like, so from a teacher perspective, well, what do I do? They got a box. How do I know they did it? It's really looking for them to be more experiential in their learning, right? So it's not about completing a worksheet. It's about doing something that makes a connection to the concept. And so the end product might be that I built something, or I made something, or I drew something. And the way that you know that it is completed is that maybe the parent or the guardian will take a picture and text it to you, right? Maybe there's a call that's set up where you can call and talk to the kid and just tell me about your experience. What happened? What did you love about this activity? What did you hate? Well, what were you not able to do? How come? Tell me a little bit more, so that you really get an understanding in that way to then say, so if you did have the baking soda, I'm making that up. If you did have the baking soda, what do you think it would have happened if you would have did this? So that you're helping them to just think critically about what's happening. The more that we move towards helping our kids be critical thinkers and questioners, being able to use what's happening around them as a learning experience, the easier it becomes for them to really see the value in what is happening, one, with the world, two, with the situation that they're in, and three, with learning in general.
Thank you.
Yes.
Kari, this is Dean. I'm going to post some closing notes, but Steph posted a great question about productive conversations with colleagues. If you want to take a look at addressing that one real quickly, and then I'll post a couple of closing notes for people to look at.
Okay. So the question is, how do you have productive conversations with colleagues? Oh, it just, hold on, you just, with colleagues or people that maybe don't want to address their own bias or reject the norm. So the key is, and I know we all hate this because we want to move quick, you got to start with where they are. And I am really big on stories, right? So it's always about using stories as a way to convey messages is one thing that I would offer. The second is to remember where you were. I always have to remind folks that where we are in this moment, when we're like, yeah, can you believe that they said that? How many years ago was it that you wouldn't have been part of the can you believe they said that, right? So it's always going back to what were you like prior to being where you're at now? And what were some of the things that helped you to kind of move the needle? Because those are the things that we have to be mindful of. What are some of the things that helped us to move the needle, and utilize those as ways to attempt to work with folks that aren't quite where we would love for them to be at, right? And so it's remembering that everybody is on their journey at different times. And then what do you do, right? So the what do you do is taking them with where they are in that moment and helping to gently nudge them forward. So that would be what I would offer. Thank you, you guys, for being here today, for choosing to be with us. I so enjoyed having you there, and thanks for listening and participating. And I hope you have a great rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a good one, you guys.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to end this, Dean. Is that what I do?
I think so.
All right. Well, thanks for being here,
Kick the rest of
Dean.
us out. All right. Thanks so
Talk
much.
to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to end.